Well, hello there YouTube, and welcome to another portrait painting tutorial. So today we are going to talk about how shapes create form, and it's going to be a very important topic, especially when it comes to um, what we're going to be doing on this, let's say, this area of the painting. Last time we worked on this, so if this is your first time seeing this painting, please check out the live stream that I did last week, but definitely hang out with us. Feel free to ask any art related questions during the duration of this stream. On the palette here we have the same set of colors that I use for every other painting scenario, whether it's still life, portrait, figure, landscape, animal portrait, something out of imagination or whatever. I use the same set of colors. So let's go ahead and start to mix up a skin tone now. So shapes of color create form. Color has three components to it that are worth considering: hue, value, and chroma. Hue, value, and chroma. Hue, what color is it? Value, how light or how dark is it? Chroma, is it a bright color like a stoplight red, or is it not as bright of a color like the red of an apple? Think about things like that. So right now I'm mixing up a kind of a basic skin tone. Looking at the reference here, it's kind of more of an orangey-ish. I don't exactly know what to call the color, but it's more of an orangey-ish. And just to try something out, I'll just put this down. Obviously it's a little bit dark, but I'm going to be using this to create form anyway. So this is going to be our little reference point there that we're going to work from. So I used burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, even a little bit of dioxazine purple, and white. Added a little bit of orange molybdate, which is closer to cadmium scarlet. The colors are very similar to the colors of the color of the palette. So let's get into a close-up now. But you'll see, relative to the painting, it is a completely different color. So the question: how do you create form from shapes in painting? The most important aspect, remember the three things that I mentioned: hue, value, and chroma. The most important is going to be value. How light or how dark is it? Value is going to be the way that you describe how things, how forms turn in space. So obviously this value is too dark. It's not, that sharp on the model's face. So this is just a starting point for me. I'm going to go and I'm going to lighten it and adjust it from there. We also have a Facebook group made just for viewers of these live oil painting tutorials. A link for that is also in the description box of the video. And that's getting closer to the form that we want. Now we'll mix up something lighter and more pink. So let's go with Cadmium Red, which actually, in this spot, I usually have Cadmium Red Deep Old Holland. That's the red that I suggest to use. I ran out of it, and I had some Windsor Red left. So I'm just kind of going through it. So whenever I say Cadmium Red, I mean Windsor Red. It is not as strong as Cadmium Red, so I have to use a little more of it. But it gets the job done. It creates a pink. One shape at a time. So I'll place a shape down and stand back and ask myself, is that shape the correct value first? And the value needs to get a little bit lighter. What about the hue? The hue is a little too pink, so I'm going to go towards the let's say cooler spectrum, I guess. So I'm digging into some of my dry lead tin yellow. But if you stab into this dry oil paint like this, right in underneath, if you're lucky, you'll find some wet paint. And I did. When oil paints dry, they dry on an outer layer. They create like an outer crust. A little more white. Add some Cerulean Blue. Now I'm working with shapes, not just the hue, value, and chroma. There's another aspect to it, the position of the shape relative to other shapes. And this shape would not work if it was up here. This shape would not work if it was down here. So the hue, value, and chroma, and now the position of the shape. If it is in the right spot, it will work. The next aspect to talk about are relationships between the shapes. So I can now relate this shape, and this shape. And of course there are shadow shapes in there that we didn't quite get into yet. So I think we're going to go ahead and mix that right now. So I'm going with red and green. My red was Windsor Red, which is standing in place for Cadmium Red Deep. It's more like a Cadmium Red Light, to be honest. And my paints are starting to dry a little faster than I'm used to. And I think that's just because the weather's getting warmer. Thin out the paint a little bit to loosen it up. Now this might be too light. Let's check this out. Remember, these shapes of value have to work relative to one another. That is way too light. So I'm going to go back to the YouTube, and there seems to be something weird going on with my chat box. So we've got at least 20 of us here, or should I say at most 20 of us here, and I haven't had a single comment. So I'm going to type, is the chat box working? Or is everyone that focused that they're not asking any questions? You can feel free to ask any art-related questions, as long as it relates to paintings. Perfectly fine. I'm going to make a darker green. Alizarin. I like to go cross-complementary. I don't really have too many earth colors on my palette, other than burnt sienna and yellow ochre. So I go with cross-complementary colors to create earth color looking shapes. Hey Janice, hey Christine, hey Brian Long. I'm glad the chat box is working. Alright, so that color, this green, is an exaggeration. That is way too green. Also way too light. So, not a problem. We're going back to the palette and we're going to adjust everything. Hey Bert, 2008. Glad you're enjoying the work. So, I went straight to purple. Dioxazine purple does wonderful things to cadmium green. This is going to be our little shadow puddle. So the purple makes the green a little less brown, a little more blue. However, it's still very flat. So we're gonna work into this. Gonna darken it. I went with Alizarin, Viridian, to create a dark. Now I didn't oil out the painting because I didn't really cover that much of it last time. So some of these darks have sunken in quite a bit, which is worth noting. If colors sink in, like this was definitely darker when it was wet, just push it darker if you don't oil it out. So you could oil it out if you want to, if you're not going to have that many layers. Now we're going to change to a smaller brush, push the darks yet again. Now moving the brush strokes in this direction so that I don't have too much glare. So I'm going across the color wheel and creating a dark, warm, bluish color. Working with color is very individual. Some people will prioritize value. Others will prioritize color, light effects. The most important thing is that you balance it all. Color, so the hue, has the strongest effect in describing light conditions. Is it sunlight? Is it natural light? Is it daylight? Is it clinical looking light, like overly bluish light? Is it the quality of the light? Is it a sunset? Is it a morning? Is it an afternoon? The values could be similar, but the colors describe the condition of the light. However, you can't describe the form as much with condition of the light as much. You can And we're going to get to that at some point. You can use color change alone to differentiate planes. If you get into a high level of subtlety. But that's beyond where we are right now. And I like to use lead white for portraiture. Sometimes I'll use titanium white if there's a super bright highlight somewhere and I want to push it brighter. But for the most part, lead white, it does a good job of keeping a lot of a big range in the middle values. So you see that there's only really like these are darker, this is darker. These are the same value just about, this is lighter, and that's about it. Titanium white, it will push your values really light, really fast if you're not careful. Now I'm putting in a plane change for the sclera. The white of the eye is not white. It is usually some kind of midtone. Especially in here in the shadow realm, it is definitely darker than what we're seeing in the light. And the color that you use for the sclera is very important. It's usually some kind of gray, some kind of blue-gray with some skin tone. Usually. But sometimes there are exceptions. What you want to watch out for is pink and yellow. I'm using Sable brushes for these shapes. Sable brushes have a wonderful quality to them that is very unique in the sense that they hold a lot of paint, but they're very soft. So they allow you to make very delicate marks with a lot of paint, which allows you to have optimum control. It is true that you can give an experienced painter garbage brushes and give a complete beginner the highest quality brushes ever, and obviously the experienced painter's painting will look like an experienced painter's painting, and the not as experienced painter's painting will look like a not experienced painter's painting. So, and with that logic, what's the point of getting higher quality brushes then? And the answer is reliability and predictability. So these brushes, along with other more high-end brushes, will be very predictable. The marks that they'll make won't be a shock to you. That predictability makes it reliable. If it is reliable, it will take one of the burdens of learning something new and lessen them. So for example, I'm on the palette here, and suppose I had a cheaper brush and it just didn't grab this color, and it still had the dark color. So I go up here, and if it's too dark, I'm like, oh well, it was too dark. Go back to the palette and try again. That step that I would have had to do, not that it happened, but if it did happen, that extra step, if I was just a beginner, say less than a year, less than 2 years of painting experience, that would impede my learning. So, with that logic, having higher quality brushes, not that I'm sponsored by any brush company, I don't care which company you use, use whatever makes you comfortable, but when it comes to details and things like this, very fine marks, this is almost like a Sharpie. The feeling almost like a Sharpie. Really nice controlled precision. I have used, depending on how long you've been with me on YouTube, in the past I would use just anything, any brushes I would find at like local art stores, and I would just kind of advocate for that, just use whatever. But since then I've learned, you live and you learn. So if you have the means to upgrade your materials, it's worth the investment. As long as you take really good care of your materials. Speaking of precision, I'm working into the contour. Very careful. I'm very careful not to change the contour too much. Remember, when you're working with shapes of color, you need to look at hue, value, chroma, and then position, and then you're relating the colors to one another. And then there's this thing called edge. An edge is really down to focus. There's other applications like blending and stuff with edge, but in this instance it's focus. There's more focus closer to the eye, so it will get sharper. Hey, Stephanie Thompson. And now I'm seeing that is not as, the cheek is not protruding as much as I made it seem before. And I am pushing the value of the background a little bit. So when you want to have a nice controlled brush mark, for a crisp edge, a sharp edge, or a medium sharp edge, you're going to want to have a lot of paint on your brush, and you're going to want to be able to thin the paint out, either with solvent or with medium. Since I already have a layer of paint down on the background, I should be able to use a little bit of medium. So let me check if this is still wet, and it is. So I'm going to use that, which is Neo-Megilp. It probably doesn't show on the camera. There it is. Neo-Megilp. Lots of paint, and I'm thinning it out a little bit. Kind of has a melted butter consistency. And this will give me more control over the sharper realm of the values, or the edges. Sharper edges, more control. Okay, so now I'm just going to keep working these planes. This edge here needs to become much more precise. It's kind of foggy, kind of lost. So I'm going to use the same brush, same idea, except with skin tone now. So I'm going with Viridian, or Sienna. Now see how much paint this the Sables can hold. Lead white is another thing as well. If you can use it, it will make your learning much simpler. Or you could use flake white replacement. Flake white replacement from Gamblin would be a much better tool to use than just using straight up titanium white. And what happens is I used a lot of white. As you saw, I just took a chunk of it off of there. So because it's lead white, the value doesn't raise as much, and I have a thicker consistency of paint. It's much more creamy, and I'm able to manipulate the paint. If I had titanium white, I'd have to use just a tiny bit of it, and then I would have to substitute the remaining thickness of the paint with some other colors, which is not impossible. It's just different. So once again, that is a big chunk of lead white. Mix it in here, and it doesn't raise the value all that much, but it does give it a nice kind of heavy feel. So on top of edge work, there's also paint handling. So just when you thought you knew everything, there's something new to learn. And that is the joy of learning. That is the beauty of learning painting. Oh, thank you so much for the super chat, Stephanie. Thank you so much for the super chat. I think everyone knows what time it is. Time for a certain cat to make its way on here. So thank you so much for the super chat, Stephanie. We have got with us here what everyone was hopefully waiting for. Holding a bunch of paintbrushes is our super chat to Grumpy Cat. So super chat Grumpy Cat shows up every time there is a super chat, so thank you so much. And as always, we're going to have super chat Grumpy Cat teach us a thing or two about painting. Super chat Grumpy Cat is like that pink that you mixed for the nose. Was it this pink? You know, that pink is, it's a little too pink. It is way too saturated. Didn't you know that color had 3 components? Hue, value, chroma. You must have forgotten about the chroma. So what do you do when something is too pink? Well, you can add gray to it. Certainly you can add gray to it. But if you add gray to it, you're going to cool it down. Are you sure you want to cool it down? One thing you could do, you can go cross-complementary. Cross-complementary. What is a complementary color? The complement of red is green. Pink is red and white. So if you add a little bit of green to the pink, it will neutralize it. Just a tad bit. This is what Grumpy Cat is telling us here. So Grumpy Cat says, add a little bit of Viridian to your color. Grumpy Cat says, now what we're going to do is we're going to add a tiny bit of this color that we mixed up onto this plane. And see that? Now it looks naturalistic. Thanks, Grumpy Cat. Thanks for that advice. Grumpy Cat says, thank you so much, Stephanie, for your super chat. And if anyone wants to see super chat to Grumpy Cat show up and teach us a thing or two, please feel free to give me a super chat. Drop us a super chat. AKA Gotta love using super chat Grumpy Cat. And so I'm gonna work this plane and this area side by side. And it was a little too green, and the purple didn't quite make it what I wanted it to be, so I'm going to add burnt sienna to it. A little bit of cadmium orange. On the reference you can tell that it's not that dark and it's not that green. Not that I'm trying to match the color, I'm looking at the colors in relationships. Each of these colors have to work in relation to one another. If they don't, then it will appear incorrect. But don't try to match any color. When you're painting from life, you cannot match a color unless you hold up a palette knife with the paint, next to the object. But even then, see colors in relation to one another. It's much more freeing than trying to diagnose a color. So that seems to work a little better for our shadow. Took a while to get to that color, but now that we have it, I'm going to block in the rest of the shadow shapes down here. And there's nothing like portrait painting. It has a certain, I don't know, feeling, at least for me. There's a sense of calmness, but also kind of like a sense of challenge. There's always a challenge in trying to capture nature. And capturing it in such a way that it's not a perfect photographic replica. That's the problem I have with commissions. Most of the time, I really have to explain to a client, like, this is not going to be a replica of your photograph. I have an inkjet printer that's going to do just the job that you want at a fraction of the cost. I have to explain these things. There was more of an angle to the side of her face that I didn't quite have before. And with a profile view, the silhouette is absolutely vital. You can kind of get away with a fluffy looking silhouette with a, like a front and center view, a perfect 3/4 view. But with a profile, the silhouette takes a lot of the viewer's attention. Now I'm going to blur some of these lines under the chin. So pay attention to the strategy we are using. A lot of focus went into the main triangle. I don't always work this way. Sometimes I'll go and I'll cover big shapes and work with big shapes and then go into the specifics like this later on. But sometimes I just feel like locking right into the specifics. So I don't always work the same way. Just depends on how I'm feeling. This is not a very high energy way of working. This is more kind of like a chill afternoon or relaxing morning kind of way, pace that I'm going in. And sometimes I'm more energetic. Sometimes I'll work with big shapes and refine it from there. Almost like the same. It's like music. You feel like listening to something more hardcore or something more slow paced and relaxing. This one is the slow paced and relaxing. Hey, the Jack. Welcome to the stream. We are going to return to the nose now, and with the shadow color, we're going to add a more precise shape to the edge of the nose. One thing that's catching my eye is that the edge of the nose is relatively close to the edge of the face. Now I'm going to mix up a dark accent. I definitely suggest that you watch and rewatch these streams as pre-recorded videos. They will be available for you to watch as pre-recorded videos, and ask yourself, are you ever in a similar situation in your own portrait paintings or your own paintings in general? Are you feeling more energetic more relaxed, motivated? How are you feeling? That can affect what approach you use, which is why the same approach for every painting all the time is typically not a good idea. You're not always feeling the same way. And if you learn in a fast-paced alla prima, everything's got to get done right now, and if it's not done perfectly, the world's going to end kind of method, because that can happen sometimes with alla prima, then you're not going to feel like painting. You're going to go and feel like doing something else. Likewise, for example, if I only knew a slow and methodical way of working like this, and I was feeling more energetic, I would be really bored working like this, and I would go and do something else. So it's really a good idea to have a balance. Understand how you're feeling and adjust your pace and your method based on that. And back to shapes. You see how I'm just relating this shape? This was too dark relative to the bottom. There's just a slight dark shape up here. That's obviously not this low, but I'm making room for it. Alright, so now is the time in my stream. I'm going to ask everyone a question that I tend to always ask because I'm always curious about this. What is currently on your easel? And currently on my easel, you see this painting, but I have a second easel with my studio paintings, or with my current studio painting. I added a tortoise or a tortoise sculpture to a double portrait that I've been working on since like October. So what is currently on your easel? And if nothing's on your easel, that's acceptable too. Also, don't forget, in the description box of this video, you'll see a link to a Facebook group that I created specifically for viewers of these live oil painting tutorials. Feel free to join and share your current ongoing artworks with everyone. Oh, that's a good one. So the Jack has written, I have nothing on the easel at this time, for I do not have an easel. You know what I used to do when I was when I didn't have an easel? I would use a clothing basket and put my canvas on the clothing basket and lean it on a wall. That used to be my easel. Hi, Blue Sky. Stephanie, a gessoed board needs a few more layers. I really should do more preparation work too myself. I've got so many linen canvases I need to stretch. And prime. I do have a lead primer now. Hey Leonie, portrait of your grandfather and Great grandfather. Oh, awesome. I'm going to paint into that red. A grayish version of that red, closer to the blue. And this is how you turn form with shapes. Things that are darker because they're turning away from the light. Things that are lighter because they are closer to being perpendicular to the light source. I remember last week with Grumpy Cat we were working on this plane. Alright, so let's move on towards the mouth now. And I'm going to start off with some little dark accents. Cleaned off the brush a little bit. My question for everyone, another question is, what do you use as a palette? I refer to this as my forever palette, which is a palette that I've bought when I was 30 years old. I'm currently 31, so however long my painting career is going to be, I hope to continue using this palette, and every time I meet someone I'll say I've been using this palette since I was 30. Though I do have some palettes that I used when I was like 17. I still have them. But this palette I will use consistently for traditional oil paints. And no other palette. So Jack, you use your sketchbook to draw. Cool. Do you use Canson Brown, Strathmore? And definitely feel free to share your artworks with us in the Facebook group. It's a small group, only about 20 participants. Ronald Miller, you have a piece of glass for one and a wooden one as well, depending on what you're painting. Cool. Definitely tempered glass. Leonie, you're working on the tempered glass. Yeah, glass is kind of nice. You can just scrape the paint off if it dries. I'm using a plexiglass one for water mixable oil paints. I'm currently making some still life and landscape paintings with water mixable. And I'm using a plexiglass on that, so I actually don't even clean it. I just scrape it whenever I'm done. So I'll show you what that one looks like. You may have seen this one before. It's just a standard oval plexiglass palette. It still has paint from a landscape I was painting. I like water mixable oil paints for really fast still life and landscape paintings. So with the plexiglass I can just kind of scratch it if I want to, or just leave it like that. Water mixable oil paints take a very long time to dry. So chances are, even if I scrape the palette a month from now, the paint is going to probably come off without much of a challenge. But this is the one that I will use only with traditional oil paints. Hey Ronald Miller, what's my take on water mixable? I like using Cobra Talons for the water mixable oil paints. I really enjoy the chromatic range that it has. It's excellent for fast paintings like alla prima paintings, or a painting that's only going to have like a couple layers. The problem with water mixables is that they take a long time to dry. And there's one YouTube video in particular that I made, and I remember talking about don't do what I'm doing. It's one of the few times I ever said that. And it was a water mixable video where I used olive oil, which one of my friends suggested using. It works as a medium as when you're sketching, but it will never dry. And I mentioned that that it's not archival. If you want to make a painting that will actually last, don't use olive oil. But you know, people tend not to read, so some people will look at it and kind of say whatever they want. So typically with water mixable, you don't really want to use medium too much, just water to thin it out. And just create paintings that you're just going to knock out really quickly. Or if you want to layer them, just let them sit for 2 to 3 weeks. And after 2 to 3 weeks, the painting should be dry enough to continue to work on. One thing I really like about water mixables, and it's another reason why I'm using it for really fast still life and landscape, is that it's so easy to clean the brushes. It's like incredibly simple. Just hot water if you're using bristles, cold water if you're using sables. Use your soap, whichever soap you're using. I recommend the Master soap. And the paint just falls off the brushes. It's great. And if you get water mixable oil paint on your clothes or whatever, which I tend to get paint on everything, it's super easy to clean it. Yeah, it's excellent for landscapes and still lifes. I mean, if you plan on finishing them like in one sitting, because the problem is you're going to wait for them to dry for a long time. And it also depends on the frequency of how much you paint. So you know, if you're painting more frequently, you might want to use traditionals instead, because they do dry faster. And water mixable also doesn't have lead white. So there's that. But there's also something so freeing about water mixable. Knowing that I can just leave my brushes overnight and they're not going to dry. If I leave the paint on my palette, it's not going to dry. Whenever I'm tired, it takes 2 seconds to clean. And stuff like that. Like, it's really convenient. Like if you're traveling somewhere and you want to bring your oil paints and you don't really want to deal with the hassle and all you're going to do is sketch, then water mixable is a good idea. Now, one thing I should mention though about water mixables is I've heard some people say that they handle like student grade oil paints, and after using them for some time, I kind of agree with that statement, and I'm going to explain why. And this would actually be a good example for that. High quality paints versus not so high quality paints. And the same thing about an experienced painter using not so great materials and a not so experienced painter using great materials. Obviously, the experienced painter is going to make their paintings look like an experienced painter painted them. So that still applies. But in general, subtlety is kind of hard, a little bit harder to achieve with water mixables. And I think it has something to do with the fact that I don't have lead white and I'm used to using it. So for example, if I change a color, make it a little more green, it gets too green. If I change it to make it a little darker, it gets too dark. If I change it to, okay, so looking at this, right, if this was water mixable and I wanted a light shape to cut across the top of the upper lip. Okay, so for example, that little mark, subtle in value, subtle in color, would have been harder for me, and maybe it's just psychological, but it would have been a little bit harder for me to attain that precise of a mark with water mixable. The best thing I can say is it's slippery. The values are slippery. It's easy to slip out and make the value too far in one direction, or the color too far in one direction. And it's the same thing with student grade paints. I did use those in the past, so it's easy to slip out with student grade paints and make something too green, too red, too blue. Whereas higher quality paints give you that reliability, control. Now, an experienced painter is going to know when something is not the value or the color that they want. And they're going to go and they're going to adjust it on their palette and then just keep moving. So, you know, it's not going to be something that's going to change everything to use higher quality materials, but it helps. And saying all that, I'm still going to use water mixable oil paints, but more for quick paintings that I plan on selling in the future. Which leads me to my next question for all of the viewers. Question that I have asked before, but sometimes we do get some new viewers here, so I'm curious. What is your favorite medium to work in? Question for everyone. So acceptable answers are anything. You could like to draw with cheeseburgers. You could draw with pretzels. You could do ink, pen and ink. You can do oil painting. You can do acrylic or whichever. What is your favorite medium to work with? Question for everybody. Alright, so Stephanie, oil paint. Leonie, oil paint. But Jack, you don't have one. It's all good. I do suggest you try oil paints. Or if you do, then I would suggest you try a different brand, maybe. Oh, a favorite, you mean? I see. BVN, you prefer water mixable oil paints? Cool, cool. Let's see, Janice, oil or watercolor? Can't say I've done much watercolor. Never tried it. So the Jack, you've tried oil paints in the past, and they weren't your favorite. Is there any reason the oil paint wasn't your favorite? Janice, you love the easy cleanup of watercolor. Yeah, watercolor has a really rich history. Of course, we know I guess the first name that comes to mind is Sargent. I'm pushing the color of the lips a little towards the violet. You had to use oil paints when you were attending. Lots of messes. That's what I was thinking. I think most that don't necessarily prefer oil paints, it's either for the health reasons or for the mess. And I'm not gonna be a hypocrite. I tend to get oil paint on kind of a lot of stuff. I try not to, but you know, as I'm standing here, there's a print of my palette on the carpet because I did drop my palette on the carpet one time. So it does get messy, I'm not gonna lie. There are ways to avoid the messiness though. One way to avoid it is to have a dedicated palette box. So always keep your palette in a palette box like this one. And it really helps, especially if you're like me and you tend to knock things down onto your palette and stuff. That definitely helps. Hey Ronald Miller, oh thank you for the super chat. Thank you. Oh, of course the supplies definitely help. Yes, thank you for the super chat, and it is now time once again for the super chat. Grumpy Cat, so thank you so much for the super chat, Ronald Miller. So as always, we are going to have Grumpy Cat teach us a thing or two, and I was just working on the lips, so I'm going to have Grumpy Cat take a look at the lips for a second. So Grumpy Cat, what do you think about the lips? Grumpy Cat is looking. Grumpy Cat's like, first of all, aren't you standing back, you party? You should be standing back more. You've been painting for 14 something years now and you're not standing back? Shame on you, you party. That's what Grumpy Cat is saying. So, Grumpy Cat's looking at the lips and saying, are you sure that the light and shadow on the upper lip is well differentiated, or are you starting to mess up with your light and shadow? Look at that. Grumpy Cat's looking at us like, Yupari's lost his light and shadow on the lips. Something's going on here. He's not paying attention. So Grumpy Cat is going to grab the Sable brush from my hand, and with her paw, she is going to mix a value that is pink, but not quite that pink. And she is saying it just needs to be a little less chromatic and a little bit lighter, says Grumpy Cat. So she is going to go to the painting and she is going to correct my mistakes. So there she goes right here. She's like, you know what, Yupari, you should be above this by now. You should be able to always maintain your light and shadow shapes. Shame on you for losing them. Shame on you. So here we have the light and shadow shapes are now differentiated. So what did we learn from Grumpy Cat? Grumpy Cat says, you've got to stand back. If you don't stand back, you're going to lose light and shadow. So that was a Grumpy Cat once again teaching us a thing or two about oil painting. Thank you so much, Ronald, for the super chat. And remember, everyone, if you want to see Grumpy Cat over here giving us some advice, definitely feel free to leave me a super chat per every super chat, I will have super chat Grumpy Cat come and teach us a thing or two. So Dennis, you're painting a house in acrylic similar to Edward Hopper's style. That's neat. Edward Hopper is a very quiet kind of style of painting. I tend to really like that era of Edward Hopper paintings. Yep, standing back good for all art. I would agree. Grumpy Cat knows what she's talking about. So for the lips, I'm trying to make them a little less pink, so I'm gonna go with a little more purple. And I'm using purple only as a blue, which is weird. I'm not using purple as a purple. I'm using it as a blue to make the lips a little closer to, say, like a lavenderish pink. Hey, Southern Comfort. Where is the subject before this one? The subject, I'm not sure what you mean. The subject? Oh, you mean like the video before this one? I'm hoping it's my most previous, or the previous YouTube video. Not sure I understand the question. Oh, and the picture. This was taken in my portrait painting class that I'm currently teaching. I'm teaching an in-person class in Howard County, Maryland. So once again, shout out to any of my in-person students that are watching these streams. So the model Candace is currently posing for my students in an 8-week portrait class. I don't know if she had makeup on during this picture. If you're referring to the painting, it is a lot more red at the moment. Let's see. So Dennis, let's see. You like to use a glass palette for the easier cleanup. I understand that. Designs by CAD Pro, do you ever go to other places for your classes? I have applied to teach at other places, but haven't really been accepted. Most art schools will only, I mean, I can't speak for all of them, so in general, most art schools only want their graduates to teach classes in their schools. Since I only attended classes, I didn't graduate from a dedicated art school. I graduated with a math degree, so my background's a little different. It's a little harder for me to teach at other art schools. The school I teach at is really nice because it is a community art center, so they've got a little bit of everything in there. But I would totally love to teach at like a dedicated realist painting school. But it's kind of hard to get into one to teach if basically self-made. So it's a little harder. That's kind of the politics, part of the politics in the art world. So yeah, she is currently posing for my in-person class. It's pretty neat. It's a smaller number with only 5 students, so I get to give more individualized instruction. So Ronald, let's see, unfortunate one at that. Some of the best artists are more self-taught. I agree. I wouldn't call myself completely self-taught though. I had very good teachers. I just didn't finish the diploma program at the school that I went to, Studio Incaminati. I only did 1 year there, and I also took like various workshops there. Most of my long-term training comes from an artist named Paulden Hamilton. He basically took me in when I just started. I was like 17, 18. I think I met him like a month before I turned 18. So I kind of learned in that way, almost like in a apprenticeship style. I would even paint in his studio once in a while. Way back when. Hey Jack, did you ever beat the devil out of the brush? Like Mr. Bob Ross. I will say I don't think I have beaten the devil out of the brushes. The brushes kind of maintain their inner devil. So no, I don't really clean the brushes in that way. Oh, thanks, Designs by CAD Pro. I've got about 5 minutes, so I'm going to see if I can just cover this little section here, and then next time we'll continue to move around. But I've kind of really want to go and add more form there, but I'm working one little step at a time. One thing that's really good about sables and bristles, like I mentioned, is they hold a lot of paint. Another thing is they tend to last a long time. I'm not that great with brushes. I'm actually pretty terrible with brushes. I kind of just throw them in the freezer, put them in a Ziploc bag and put them in the freezer when I'm done if I don't feel like cleaning them. And I let some brushes sit for like 2 months like that. And I was able to restore most of them, though I did lose one. And I think it was because I used too much fast drying medium on it. I did lose one brush, kind of expensive brush, but for the most part they tend to last pretty long. He designs what Cabro. He seems more like a Bob Alexander type painter. Oh, you mean Bill Alexander? Yeah, that was his teacher. Bob Ross's teacher was Bill Alexander. There's a lot of subtlety in these shapes. Unfortunately, the camera may not capture most of the subtlety. On the palette, there's many different variations of pink and orange. Alright, so this plane is going to cover all the way up here to the cheekbone. But over here, there's going to be a whole bunch of other structures. The side of the cheekbone, and then this is actually going to taper down towards the mandible. So that is going to be content for next time. Remember, if you want to connect with the audience on a more regular basis, definitely check out the Facebook group that I created for the viewers of these live streams. The link to that is in the description box of this video, along with the link to my online classes. And I kind of purposefully just blurred that shape there because I don't want anything there to dry super sharp. So that should be good for now. I'm gonna zoom you back a little bit. I'm gonna pick up the camera and move it so that you see the painting with less distortion. Obviously a long way from finished, but we've made some progress today. Kind of blurring this so it's not so sharp. So now we are at a total of 3 hours of painting time on this portrait. All of the footage is available for you to watch as a pre-recorded video on my YouTube channel. If you just click onto the videos on my YouTube channel, it should be the previous video. Also, I created a playlist for these live oil painting sessions. So with each one of these live oil painting sessions, you should have a playlist available. Just look up the playlist. I think I only have like a couple of them that's public. So live oil painting sessions on my YouTube. Thanks for joining Designs by CAD Pro. So today was more of a kind of slow, easy does it kind of chill way of working with the shapes of colors. hopefully this video has provided you some guidance on how to create form using shapes of color. I'm going to hang out for a little bit and see if there are any extra questions. Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Leonie. And thank you, Stephanie. Let's see, a question from Ronald. Have you ever tried to do a portrait in black and white, then use washes of transparent color, perhaps on an egg wash or such, then add slight variations of colors and highlights? Yes, I have. And in my online classes, the first three projects in my online classes start off that way in monochrome. So yes, I have worked in that style, and I use that style to teach absolute beginners. Well, thanks, Designs by Cad Pro. Dennis Smear, your preferred is oil paint. Awesome, awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Ronald. Speaking of, so once again, Super Chat Grumpy Cat is here to say thank you so much to the viewers that gave me super chats, gave us super chats during this stream. So thank you so much, Stephanie and Ronald, for the super chats during this live stream. Once again, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Remember, if you want to take your online art education with me further, please check out my online classes on patreon.com/yourpartyartist, also listed in the description box of this video. If you would like to connect more with the audience watching these live painting sessions, please check out the Facebook group that I created. Also, don't forget that there's a playlist for the live oil painting sessions, so you could watch hours and hours and hours of oil painting footage. Thank you so much for watching. Oh, we got one more question. Let's see. Yep, Grumpy Cat is saying good night. A question from Art. Are you from New York? Nope, I am from Maryland. Born and raised in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area. Particularly Maryland. So Art, hopefully we'll catch you again next time. Remember that I am currently doing these live oil painting tutorials every Tuesday from 7:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. I wish you the very best in all of your artwork, and I'll see you on the next one.